Welcome, everybody. I'm Leon Feinstein, Professor of Education and Children's Social Care in the Department of Education in Oxford. I'm delighted to welcome a very distinguished and fascinating panel today for our discussion about child in the wild, children in the digitizing and digitized world. I'm just going to say a couple of words of introduction and then hand over to Vicky, who will chair today. I wanted to introduce this seminar as part of a series on the rights of children that was originally brought about as a complement to a course that I teach on the MSc in Education in Oxford that is about the implementation of the rights of children. I'm very interested in the question of how are we doing on the delivery of rights. But three of the students from last year were of the view that a lot of wider issues, a lot of issues of meaning and philosophy and culture and globalization and power were not addressed by my focus on policy implementation. And I've worked with Wiam and Nika and Manoli this year who've selected a panel of speakers, or five panels of speakers to address those wider issues. And I really want to thank Manoli, who you can see there, and Wiam and Nika, who I think have brought together some fantastic speakers, and I'm very excited about the meeting today. I should say we're in webinar format, so colleagues listening and watching won't be able to see themselves on screen, unfortunately, and it's important that if you have questions, please put them in the chat and they will be addressed. The session is being recorded and will be available on the department's website in due course. Lastly, I'd just like to introduce Professor Nash, Vicky, who is the Director and Associate Professor and Senior Policy Fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. And Vicky's own research draws on her background as a political theorist, addressing policy implications of evidence characterizing children's use of internet technologies. These are very big issues. There's a lot to discuss, so I'll get out of the way and let Vicky then introduce the session. And thanks very much, colleagues, for participation today. I'm very much looking forward to this meeting.
Thank you, Leon, for that kind introduction, and Manoli and crew for the invitation to be here. So we've got a really fantastic threesome of speakers this evening. I will introduce them in turn in a second. The format for this evening is going to be that I'm going to ask each of them in turn to speak for about 15 minutes. Then we'll perhaps have a little bit of a conversation amongst the four of us. And then I will open it up for debate from the floor for the last half hour. As you have just been told, though, please feel free to put questions in the chat as you go along, and we'll try and keep an eye on those. So even if we're at the point where we're not yet coming to the audience, there's a really good question, I might well bring it in. So the speakers that we have here, I mean, I suppose it's also that I'm now sufficiently old that I would find it quite rude if somebody sort of summed up how many decades of experience I have, but there are a fantastic number of decades of experience among our three speakers tonight. Sonia Livingston is a professor at the Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics, and she is again one of the sort of the key figures really who defined this field of children's use of digital technologies, and particularly from a sort of heavily sort of a participatory child rights perspective that emphasizes not just the sort of risks and the harms but also the opportunities and the benefits. Sonia's most recent project, I think, is very much around children's rights in the digital age, and her most recent book is on parenting for the digital future. Our second speaker, who I think has collaborated with Sonia a fair amount over the years, is Professor Amanda Third. Amanda is a professorial research fellow in digital, social and cultural research in the Institute for Culture and Society, and co-director of the Young and Resilient Research Centre at Western Sydney University. Again, Amanda has taken a very sort of strong participation focus on her own research into children's technology practices, again, focusing, I think, quite a lot on marginalised groups and taking very much a rights-based approach. Her most recent book is on young people in the digital society. And then last but very much not least, we have an incredible individual, Anil Raghuvanshi, I apologize, I probably mispronounced that, who is the founder and president of a really important charity called Child SafeNet, Anil has, again, almost 30 years of experience in the NGO field, not just researching and writing, although I know he has also done quite a lot of that, but genuinely fighting for children's rights on the ground with UN organizations and other international organizations, including ECPAT, and working with the UN Secretary General. So again, it's not just a matter of having great research minds on the panel, it is also having three experts who have also fought really hard to protect and promote children's rights in the digital age. With that, I'm going to turn to Sonia first. Sonia, over to you, your 15 minutes. You're muted, Sonia.
End
of the day.
End of the day. Thank you so much, Vicky, and brilliant to be here and to be speaking about absolutely my favourite subject. I'm going to share my screen and aim to be efficient in setting out what I see as the issues regarding children's rights in a digital world, very much also with an eye to Leon's injunction that we should try to be practical. So, hoping that this is now sharing, okay. Children's rights in the digital world. I actually began my career as a social psychologist, an audience researcher, and someone concerned with the practicalities of how people engage with digital technologies, media technologies. And I have really shifted to a rights focus for in the last decade or so, for reasons that I think are kind of worth thinking about. And it's partly because the digital has taken over, and in the sense that digital no longer means something virtual or optional or somehow just about leisure, but rather it means something that's embedded and infrastructural and really does fundamentally affect all of our rights, but I'll focus here on children's rights. And I include in that the rights of children who themselves lack access to the digital world, but are nonetheless impacted by growing up within it. So it is a shift for a social scientist to kind of embrace a rights perspective. And I'll just begin by kind of saying why. A rights perspective invites us to be holistic, to think about the whole child and indeed the whole society. It invites us to be inclusive and to consult with all whose rights are concerned when one kind of makes normative and legal statements about rights. And that consultation includes children. A rights perspective carries the injunction that we are global. I'm not sure if I will say universalistic in our utterances, but certainly kind of global in our embrace. And that means that rights need to be thought of not only in the digital world, but also as applicable in countries, whatever their kind of economics or politics or cultural circumstances. And of course, a rights approach is normative. It focuses on what we hope is a consensually derived minimum of expectations, I would say, and it's directed at states, and states crucially have the power to bring about the kinds of changes, potentially even in relation to those extraordinarily powerful global corporates who run the digital world. It is perhaps also a rights perspective is perhaps also idealistic. We might kind of come to that. It expresses a set of kind of hopes and expectations about what could be. I'm certainly not claiming in any way that rights are implemented in ways that they always should be. Just to note, my screen is a homage to children in lockdown. This is an illustration of the small ways in which children leave their marks on the world. Adults don't always notice. I apply that thought to the digital world too. So, sorry, now I can't, oh yeah. Every day I've set up a Google alert for the words child plus internet, and every day I get an unremittingly negative stream of news about all the things that go wrong for children and the digital world, and embedded in those news stories a sense of despair and fatalism that society really can do nothing about it. And this is a far cry from those early days of the internet 30 years ago, when Tim Berners-Lee gave away the World Wide Web for free to optimize the benefits for humanity of a connected world. He did that in 1989, the same year that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted and quickly ratified by now by all countries except for the USA. Tomorrow is Safer Internet Day, now celebrated around the world in a kind of uplifting effort to promote voluntary, multi-stakeholder and grassroots actions, especially to keep children safe online. And it's an effort very much in response to the kind of news stories that I've put in front of you. And I applaud and support this effort. But I do want to say that it's not enough. Businesses, we have seen over the years, act where their reputational and financial interests align and not otherwise. States cherry pick actions they see as quick wins. And children's charities, schools, civil society puts in kind of a huge effort to raise awareness of the dangers of the internet, but it has to do that every year because there isn't the infrastructural change that would prove sustainable. And not only, but partly in response to news stories such as those I'm showing you, it is easiest to mobilize public attention and therefore the attention of those in power, especially the state. Most attention is going on child protection, which is vital. But it is not the whole story. And what I like about the rights approach is that embrace of efforts for child protection, but also provision for children in a digital world and child participation. Otherwise, we will never get back to those benefits for children that we hoped for 30 years ago: the world at your fingertips, information easily within reach, new friends for the choosing. Today, we live in a society so risk averse that even those ideas of children exploring and experimenting and making their own friends online has become it's become problematic. Almost 10 years ago, a number of researchers and stakeholders around the world began working with and initiated by the Committee on the Rights of the Child to begin to develop a rights framework for children in relation to a digital world. I think just knowing that then they called it digital media suggested there is really some kind of intellectual struggle, even in what we kind of call that digital environment, the digital world, the digital technologies. It was it's been a long process about which there is much to say that I won't say. I think it's really important to know, unless we come to it in questions, it's important to know that for those who don't know, that the way the Committee on the Rights of the Child works, like other UN committees, is very consultatively. There was a consultation originally on the kind of possibility of producing a general comment, a kind of a short 10,000 word statement of how the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child really applies to digital media, or then to the digital environment. There was an expert and a stakeholder consultation, and I was interested to see that the committee is especially keen to ensure that states contribute to that consultation. And then there was also a children's consultation, about which you will hear more a bit later. Early last year, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child adopted this general comment, this 10,000 word statement on what it means that children's rights apply in relation to the digital environment. And I don't want to kind of gloss too much over the sort of the controversies and the difficulties in the drafting. There was a small drafting group which included myself and Amanda Third, led by the Five Rights Foundation, working kind of in support of the committee, but of course the committee was in charge. And there was a lot of debate about whether, for example, there should be a right to access digital technologies, or how much we think instead of access as the route to rights in a digital world. There was a lot of discussion about the balance between protection, which is kind of universally agreed as imperative, and how to balance that with children's civil rights and freedoms. There's a lot of concern about the role of the state in relation to business, both in principle and very practically. Do states have the power? And a kind of a interesting thread running through perhaps all child rights legislation around the role of parents, and how much parents or business or others are kind of substituting for the important role of parents. For those, I'm hoping that everyone at this webinar knows what the Convention on the Rights of the Child says. This is a summary version. I never like the summary versions because no one ever summarizes exactly in the way that I would, and I'm not going to go through them all, but just to kind of point out really, the Convention has 54 articles, of which 41 are substantive rights. Most of them are rights which are also generally recognized as human rights, but there are some that are particularly highlighted for children: the right to fullest development, the right to play, the right to be treated according to their evolving capacity, their development, and so forth. And there are 4 cross-cutting rights which are absolutely critical, which includes the right to be heard, which is more observed, sadly, in the breach. Conscious of time, I just want to kind of note a few things which are particularly problematic in relation, or challenging, shall we say, in relation to the digital environment. Article 2 is the right to non-discrimination. There are challenges, really many challenges around discrimination in the digital environment. Children are sometimes lumped together as a general group, but of course they are subject to all the divisions and inequalities and possible forms of discrimination that the whole population is. Article 3 is the right to be treated according to their best interests. I don't love that phrasing, but sorry, the top priority, but the best interest concept is a brilliant way of insisting that states take a holistic approach to the child. That's very challenging in relation to the digital environment, and it's particularly challenging when that obligation is passed to businesses also as their responsibility, as they say they don't always know who is a child online, and they certainly don't know their circumstances. The right to be heard, Article 12, means in relation to decisions that affect children in the digital environment. The role of parents is particularly difficult when the digital technologies seem to kind of disintermediate parental responsibilities. Article 19, the right to protection, everyone I think would agree, but this is the forms of abuse to children are often international in form through international networks, especially, and difficult therefore for states to manage. There's a debate about how many harms, which harms. The right to education, there are some positive rights there for children. Information is challenging. Children must have full access to information without unlawful restrictions, but they must be protected from harmful information. We're having a big debate about what that means in Britain. Civil rights and liberties, the right to freedom of expression, freedom of thought, and freedom of assembly, so often overlooked in relation to children, even though so top of mind in relation to adults. The right to play, easily forgotten, very important for childhood. The right to privacy, Article 16, just this was probably the most debated when we were drafting the general comment, and is now being the most debated, I think, both because privacy has become so complex in an age of datafication, and because privacy as data becomes the right that mediates our access to all other rights, and both participation and protection. The role of parents, as I said, is critical. The role of governments is critical. Okay, I'm not going to go all through because I don't have time, but just to kind of illustrate that a lot of the rights that we're used to thinking about have a kind of particular instantiation, and perhaps get particularly kind of reconfigured in relation to the digital environment. And the digital environment itself, of course, is always changing. So I'm going to kind of, I hope I've said a few things that open up questions for the debate, because I don't in any way see this as kind of a completed task. It was a wonderful and enormous kind of multi-stakeholder effort to get a neat statement of what could be done and should be done. But there are challenges, and I'll just end with 3 challenges. One, I think will be obvious to many, is the power of major technology firms, but also the kind of plethora of little startups that don't know much about children or rights, the sheer pace and complexity of innovation and its lack of transparency, and, if I may say, politically, the desire of many states around the world to kind of promote themselves as a Silicon Valley, as a culture which doesn't put barriers in the way of digital businesses. I think my second challenge, we are increasingly seeing that implementing children's rights in the digital environment will change the internet. It will change the digital world. And people are kind of hanging on to, I don't know, some vision of how things were, and some things have been good. I hope it will all become better. But I think this call for children's rights in a digital world now echoes with parallel calls for an ethical internet, for transparency and accountability in artificial intelligence, for the rights of people with disabilities in relation to the internet, for dealing with all the inequalities and discrimination. And there are ways in which we can see the internet changing in response to some of these regulatory and kind of rights frameworks, but we don't yet know where it's going. And last, perhaps, on Leon's question of practicalities, rights statements are written at a very high level, and they are very kind of generic in a way. They have to be written in a way that someone can pick them up in almost any country in the world and it makes sense. But also, I do believe that the general comment is practical. It does set out what states do, and importantly, what states must not do, not to themselves infringe children's rights in the digital environment. And it is written in a way that kind of steers interpretations both of child rights and of the digital environment in ways that are lawful, proportionate, justified, and avoid many of the moral panics that you saw in my newspaper headlines and that kind of come up so often, particularly when we think of children. I'm showing you the child-friendly posts that are explained to children what they've said as my lead-in for Amanda. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. It's always a regret that when we do this, you can't understand everybody clapping, but that's what we would definitely be doing if we were in person. I'm going to head quickly on, I think, to Amanda, because we're going to have plenty of time for discussion. So, Sonia, thank you very much. And Amanda, if you'd like to share your screen, thank you. And Amanda, we can see something coming. We can't hear you yet.
An amazing kind of summary. Oh, have you got my sound on?
That's better.
Vicky, if my internet does drop, let me know. It can fluctuate at this time of the morning. Okay, so thank you, Sonia, for a wonderful, very energetic survey of a field which is enormously complex. And also thanks to the team for pulling together this important opportunity to reflect on how child rights are impacted by the digital, and special thanks to Manoli in particular. In keeping with some of the themes that have already been discussed in this series, I want to pick up that question of how child rights might account for diversity. And specifically, I want to push back against the claim that because child rights assert universals, they necessarily experiences. And to do this today, I want to firstly share with you a little bit about the ways that we thought about and approached diversity in the drafting of UNCRC General Comment 25, and in particular around that piece whereby we consulted with children. Then I want to share with you some very brief insights that children surfaced in the consultations. And here, I won't give you the full picture of everything that children said. I will point you to the report for a much deeper understanding of children's views and perspectives on the digital environment. But here I just want to really focus on a couple of things that children said that kind of, just to illustrate some of the tensions that are implicit in the ways that children are thinking about the digital world. And then I want to just briefly end with a couple of short provocations with an eye to sort of opening up some conversation. So let me begin by saying that from the outset, our team was committed to ensuring that the diversity of children's insights and experiences around the world, whether they're the insights and experiences of girls and boys and communities and so on, we wanted to ensure that was surfaced and channeled into the process of drafting UNCRC General Comment number 25. And the fact that the general comment opens by citing some of the things that children said in the consultation is in fact testament to some of the battles, I guess, that were won in terms of centering children's insights in the drafting process. So the consultations unfolded alongside the drafting process and were a really important reference point for us as a team as we tried to draft the general comment. We consulted with over 700 children in 27 countries, and these were primarily in the global south. To do so, we used our distributed data generation methodology, which involves designing a 5-hour face-to-face creative and participatory workshop structure. And then those workshops were then implemented by a network of over 100 youth-facing partner organisations around the world. And indeed, we're deeply indebted to those organisations for making that happen. The data that was generated via that process was then digitised and securely transferred to our team at Western Sydney University. And we were very fortunate to be able to analyse that in partnership with some of the organisations who implemented the workshops. We've used this we've used this qualitative methodology to explore children's perceptions on a range of rights, ranging from climate change's impact on food systems, to their experiences of violence, their experiences of play, which, as Sonia pointed out earlier, is very important to children, all the way through to the challenges and opportunities represented by the digital world for children's rights. We're very clear that these methods are not representative. Rather, what they aim to do is to surface as much diversity as possible in order to feed into that mammoth task of producing international guidance that can address the breadth of issues that are raised by the digital for children's rights in adequate depth. So it's really about, I guess, surfacing a range of different perspectives, including outlier perspectives, in order to inform that process. We engaged with a range of groups to canvass the insights of children with different life experiences, including those who live with disability, those of refugee and migrant status, those living on the street, those who identify as sexuality diverse, and so on. In the workshops, it wasn't just a matter of surveying what children think, but of actually actively trying to create spaces for children to explore the issues with minimal intervention from adults. And often what we were doing is asking children to reflect on issues that they've not had opportunity to reflect on in more than a superficial way. So workshops from this perspective were conceived as emergent spaces in which children develop their own insights alongside their peers and work to find language for and other ways of expressing those views. Children completed a range of creative and participatory activities, both individually and in small groups, generating ultimately a very rich picture of how they experience their rights in the digital age. So what did children say? Despite the different geographies and experiences of the children involved, there were very many things about which they agreed. But I guess the things on which they agreed were inflected very differently according to the context in which individual children are living and growing. It has been that children have a grand vision for what's possible with the digital. Around the world, they use the internet primarily for communication, connection, and sharing, followed by seeking information. And they see and they have high aspirations for the ways that the digital can help to support them to realize their rights. And to support them to realize those rights, not just online, but also offline. And I'll come back to that at the end. Far and away, the biggest challenge for the majority of children around the world, however, is that of securing routine and reliable access to the internet. Too many children around the world cannot routinely access either functional devices or a stable connection to the internet. And this is true across high, middle, and low income countries. Financial constraints are the biggest barrier to children's capacity to harness digital technology to support their rights. So too, many children, particularly those in rural and remote areas, do not live in places with reliable electricity infrastructure or connectivity. Girls in general experience much greater difficulties accessing the internet than boys do, largely due to gendered social norms about, or that suggest that girls shouldn't or don't need to engage with technology. And there's clearly a lot of work to be done there. And also children say that their parents and their teachers often lack the digital literacies that would support them as children to engage meaningfully. So these things all suggest that securing children's access should constitute a key priority for those with responsibility to children in the digital age. It's clear that whilst the digital can enable children's rights, it also can infringe them. Children are passionately keen to be part of the digital world, but they're frustrated by its faults and they feel it should serve them better. They worry about the kinds of harms that they might encounter online and are particularly concerned about encountering inappropriate content, especially violent and sexual content, as well as their potential exposure to bullying, kidnapping, murder, and other what we might think of as very serious forms of violent exploitation. And it's notable that children's fear at times when they talk about the risks of harm to them are quite you know, they resort to thinking about extreme scenarios. Girls were concerned about how technology is used to amplify sexist attitudes, but in places like Indonesia, for example, girls were more concerned about how the ways that girls were watching particular kinds of content on the internet was teaching them to dress in ways that went against religious and cultural norms, and that this potentially exposed them to violence on the streets. So you can see here very different inflections of the same kinds of challenges. So children are calling on states, technology companies, and others to better protect them from these serious risks of harm. And we hope that the general comment is going to provide some structure and guidance as states tackle those challenges. At the same time, though, it's very much worth highlighting the kind of disjuncture between adults and children's perceptions of the risks of harm online. Because whilst children did worry about some of the same things that adults worry about, they are also concerned about much more everyday, overtly social risks, the kinds of you know, teenage drama and so on that happen when they interact with their peers online. And children really want support to manage those interactions, and they want, and I think there's a need to connect up their ability to manage what adults see as these more low-level risks of harm with children's capacity to prevent more serious forms of harm to themselves and others when they're engaging online and with technology. When it comes to family life, children are very ambivalent about the effects of technology. Children that share devices with other family members, or children that live remotely from family members for economic reasons, and these tend to be children in low-income countries, but not only, they say that technology use when they're sharing those devices or connecting with family members who are far away, really strengthen their relationships with parents, siblings, and extended family members. Of course, technology medium for children to maintain their connections with family faraway places. On the other hand, though, children who live in families in which technology is a given see a double standard at play in their parents' practices. They say that parents don't always abide by the same rules that they set for their children about appropriate technology use, and they're calling out for the significant adults in their lives to role model for them how to use technology well. So clearly there's a lot of work to be done to think about how to support families to maximize the benefits of technology for children, and also to more consciously, self-consciously role model good technology use. Okay, so what children's contributions to the consultation remind us is that children's rights are far from abstract legal principles to be debated behind closed doors. Rather, children's rights are dynamic constructs whose meanings are activated and constantly refined and reinvented in the interplay between the constraints and the possibilities at play in the diverse contexts in which children live and grow. Children's rights take shape, that is, in the ways that children are enabled or not to live to their full potential in the digital environment. So while rights are seemingly they're enshrined as universal principles, in fact, rights come to life at the level of children's everyday lives. And I think this really surfaces an important point for us. I think often what we do is we turn to rights to provide the solutions to very complex challenges that lie ahead. But I think that, really there's a much more important role for rights to play, and that is in surfacing the tensions and the questions that we need to think through in order to arrive at good results for children. Rights are principles that don't tell us what actions to take necessarily, but rather remind us what is important and what our duties and obligations are. They're not a solution in and of themselves, but means to just ends. We must still exercise our judgment in the application of rights, and this exercise of judgment must always take into account the child in front of us in all of their complexity. So if you like, another way to put this is that rights, what stands between the idea of rights as universals and rights as able to encompass diversity and the complexity of different children's lives is the process of judgment. I also think that, again, to Leon's point about the practicalities of rights, and as Sonia was suggesting, rights are very useful at balancing, in the sense of balancing the competing needs, desires and aspirations of different children around the world as we take steps to protect and ensure their realisation of their rights in the digital environment. As Sonia noted, we often have a very strong protectionist focus in discussions of rights in the digital environment, and a rights-based approach enables us to balance what we might think of loosely, and I'm aware of the arguments against thinking of rights in these categories, but loosely speaking, to balance children's provision, protection and participation rights. But I think also we haven't yet really thought through the implications or the radical potential, if you like, of children's rights for the world. I think whilst rights might be said to efface difference, this is not the be all and end all. I think in the hands of adults, when we universalize both children and technology, what happens is that we tend to focus on the risk narrative, the protectionist narrative. And this can lead us down a garden path that means that we don't understand the full potential of technology for realizing children's rights. So slipping into this universalist way of framing things can be very dangerous. But the idea of the child as universal is not always a bad thing. It very much depends on context. And here, I think it's really important to think through how children themselves are using the idea of the child and the digitally enabled child to enact forms of what Spivak might call strategic essentialism, to claim their rights on their own terms. I think when, the most wonderful example of this is the ways that children are using digital technology to claim their rights to end climate change, right? To prevent climate change, or to encourage their governments to take action against climate change. Here, digital media has played, of course, a very practical role in enabling children to organize themselves, to connect with each other, to coordinate their activities, and to mount a challenge to adult-centered visions of how the world should be. But here I think too, it's not just the practical dimensions of digital media that are enabling children to claim their rights. There is also an imaginative dimension to this set of possibilities. And, and we can point to the ways, for example, that the first television broadcast of the moon landing might have played a role in helping us to think of ourselves as citizens of a global project. Digital media, in the same sorts of ways, are enabling new sorts of identifications and they can digital contemporary society. What's really notable about, if you look at the way that digital media is playing into children's action on climate change, is that children themselves, for the first time in history, digital media are enabling children to conceptualize themselves as a collective, as a global political constituency that is empowered in new ways to take action. And I think this is a wonderful example of the ways in which we are yet to think of all the possibilities for using digital media to enable children's rights around the world. And I think I'll stop there, but just with a note that I think we need a very expansive vision of the digital as we proceed to think about how technology can enable children's rights. We need to think of technology or the digital not just as facilitating children's rights in online spaces, but as potentially facilitating the full range of children's rights today. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you. Thank you very much for that really powerful contribution and some great provocations at the end there. I've suddenly realised as well, are you actually in Sydney at the moment? So you're doing this at sort of 4:35 a.m. in the morning. My goodness. So you've got up really early, and then what Neil is coming next is up really, really late at night. So again, thank you very much for doing this. Brilliant. Again, let's move on quickly. So Neil, if I can hand over to you for the third and final presentation. Again, thank you to you for staying up incredibly late this evening to do this.
Thank you very much. It's not that late as in Australia. It's about midnight, but it's okay now. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I will also try to use my presentation. Let's try to share the screen.
We can see that. It's just not in
okay. Yeah.
presentation view yet. There we go.
Okay,
Great.
so I will talk mostly about the protection issues and also the online risks and how they can be protected online. So in today's world, children are more exposed to the digital media, and it's quite important and also quite helpful that it never happened before. Like people living in a village, they have access to all the informations on their fingertips. Before we used to call it like we are living in a global village. Now all is inside our mobile phone. We can see whatever we like, and children also have that possibility to do that. So let me try by looking at how children are using the digital media and what are the rights and what are the risks and how those risks can be addressed. So let's see how the current situation of the online risks for children. Like currently, there are 4.66 billion people using the internet globally, and 1 of 3 internet users is a child. And Internet Watch Foundation saw 77% rise in self-generated sexual materials, and also the NECMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they are seeing very big increase in online sexual abuse materials through their cyber tip line reporting system. And it was like 106% increase after the COVID-19 outbreak. But countries like Nepal are seeing more problem with that. Like it's like almost 3-fold increase in cyber tip line reports from Nepal. So it's much more higher than the global average. So with the use of internet, the longer use of the internet time, it's also increasing. Actually, after the COVID outbreak, we did a survey in Nepal, and it shows that 1 in 4 children use the internet for more than 10 hours per day, including for online classes, but mostly they're using for other things. So we did also look at the uses, and they said besides studying, they're using for YouTube, they're using for social media. So the increase in online time and exposure to online risks are also increasing. And children, when we are talking about children and their rights, they have right to be protected offline and online. It's the same right. If they have a right to be protected offline, also the same right they have to be protected online. And to use the internet safely for the positive use, for the better internet, they have the right to use the internet safely, and also use for your education and recreation and to get information. So they have all the rights online as they have rights offline, and also to express their views and take part in the process of decision making which affect their life, including through the digital technology. And children, I like this saying that children are not mini human beings with many human rights. They have full rights. And also children have the right to be protected online. And this is not a virtual right. This is a real right. And the people who are at the position of fulfilling those rights have the responsibilities to fulfill those rights. And we also need to look at what are the differences between online and offline harms. If anything is harmful offline, that is harmful online as well. And if something is illegal offline, that is also illegal online. But the dimension, the nature, the scale might be different, and actually in many cases it's much more severe for the digital world. And the gravity, I would like to talk about the gravity of online child sexual abuse and exploitation as an example. Like it could be harmful as offline abuse and exploitation, and sometimes more harmful because images, videos could be shared, tampered, or misused, and those materials could reach many people in a very short time, anywhere in the world. And once in the internet, it's almost impossible to fully remove, and it will have lasting impact. I would like to share one example from Nepal. Girl studying in the college had some problem with her boyfriend, and they broke up, and the boyfriend did something very bad. So he shared those private photos and videos online. And after a couple of months, the girl was so shocked, and also she committed suicide after 2 months. It happened about 4 years ago. And even now, after 4 years, even after the suicide, the materials are still available online, and the parents are suffering. So it shows the gravity, and it shows how serious and the different magnitude, bigger magnitude, and the dimension of online abuse. And online abuse is real and it has offline impacts as well. Like the impact of online abuse is also as a result of offline cyberbullying. There could be relationship between people having some problem in schools or colleges where they are bullying someone. But if they do that online, it causes much more damage because it can be seen by many people and will last longer. So it has more damaging effect. And cyber grooming and offline sexual abuse and exploitation are also linked. So people usually they groom for online for the including for the offline abuse, and also sometimes you do both online and offline. And there are cases where people they are doing some filming of offline abuse and they share online, and also they use for sextortion. Like in Nepal, there's some groups actually the criminal groups, they are found to be doing some institutional the organizational crime, like they call someone at a hotel or somewhere, especially they use young girls, and when they try to actually they try to get the adult men, and so they use young girls and they have adult men and they film the sexual activity and they try to extort money. So the offline and online connection is also there. And also after, as the example I gave, the intimate partner violence online is also increasing. It was more offline before. Now they have everything online as well, whatever they do. So in younger generation here in Nepal, like when they have a good relationship, they have a love affair, first thing they would do is share their passwords and share their everything what they have on their phone. So in that way, the intimate partner violence online and offline is also increasing. And also the so-called revenge porn or non-consensual abusive material sharing is also increasing. And before, people used to go to villages for trafficking to contact the girls particularly and children. Now they're using internet for human trafficking. And also it's also used for forced marriage, early marriage, child marriage. So there are connections between online and offline abuses. And there are risks like children, many children, they don't know about the risk of the data, what data they are sharing and who is having access and how they will use. They don't know about that. So like one very common issue is with TikTok. It doesn't have the privacy setting provisions like in many apps, like either it's private or public. So they cannot make like it's only me or only friends. So those things in many apps, there's a problem with data privacy. And people below 13 years of age are not supposed, they should not be allowed to use social media, most of the social media, but people, they fake their age, and there's no real age verification followed by strictly by IT companies, and this should be followed very strictly. And we need to advocate for that. And no real IDs of social media users. This is another problem, like people use fake IDs and they use those fake IDs to abuse people and also do many bad things. So it's very important if we can advocate that people only with the real IDs, they will be allowed to use social media or connect people. So this is a big thing and could be debatable, but that is also causing another problem. And the deep fakes is increasing, and now people can do many things very easily. They can change the faces, voice, and other things. And many people don't have time or knowledge to identify if that's fake or real. That's also causing other problems. And in many cases, children are blamed for their own abuse and exploitation. Like I mentioned about the increase in self-generated sexual materials made by children. So if those materials get exposed and shared, the parents and other people, they blame children of taking those photos and videos and sharing with your friends. And the other thing which is quite problematic is like children are affected, they are victimized, but they are also children who are offenders. They might be doing for fun, or they think it's nobody can catch them because of their experimentation as well, and also to offend others. Children are also found to be doing these things. And for the digital age, now children in the digital age, I would like to show you some pictures. So we, in the digital age, we are digital citizens, and children are they are natives of digital world, digital age. So here, the rules and regulations are not there, but we already entered this digital world. That's a problem. And the rights, we're talking about rights, but we are not looking at the responsibilities. So what should be done and what should not be done. And next thing is like when we are in a country in a digital age, we also need to have the rules to follow and also to do our own duties. And also we don't know how to use the digital technology, and the children are not taught to do that. So there is no user guide for the proper use of the internet. Like when people go to the street, they teach their children how to cross the road. And also when somebody drives a car, they need a license and they need to learn. So in the current digital world, there is no proper teaching to the children about using the internet safely, and also to use like the driving cars. They can do anything and it may cause harm to others and themselves. And so the good touch and bad touch thing is not a new thing in the physical world or the offline world, but it is not happening in the online world. So it should also be in the online world. And there's some gaps, like the knowledge is very little, so we don't have many research studies. Awareness is very low about the impact and the severity of these online abuse and risks. And the law enforcement is very weak, and also there is no proper or adequate legal measures in many countries. Policies, directives are either not comprehensive or implemented effectively, and the support system help is not there for many people who need such help. So the priorities are to have multi-sectoral initiatives, increase budgetary allocation. This is important, like the government raises a lot of tax from internet and telephone, but the expenditure is very, very low, and that's problematic. And make efficient policies and effectively enforce the law, and raise awareness on online protection and include this in school curricula. Then I would like to show this last slide about the layers of protection. If the children know about protection online, they will know how to protect themselves. So it's very important. The first thing is the children and young people should be aware of the risks and how to protect themselves. The second is the family. The family can help to support the child, and also when there is a need, the family can also give good education, and also link with this other educators or service providers. Then the next is the community, schools, CBOs, child and youth clubs. They can provide a lot of information, raise awareness, and provide support. And the civil society, ISPs, media, private sector can also help by making the systems, filtering the inappropriate content. And the police and judiciary to take actions to deal with the cases which are affecting children. And the government for making budgetary arrangements, for making laws, for making policies. Then the UN, Interpol, and regional bodies to look at particularly the cross-border or international nature of the crime. So these are some of the things which we can look at to make the layers of protection stronger. I think that's all from my side. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Thank you so much.
Anil, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. And a really great reminder actually of the sort of the array of challenges that organizations like yours face in terms of protecting children, and also the sort of the strength of the policy agenda that you can promote in seeking action on that. So thank you. That was a really great practical set of insights. Now we are just past 6:30, so I don't think I am going to spend 15 minutes discussing all this amongst ourselves as a panel, because I can already see some questions coming in. But I did just want, there was one sort of common thread between all three of you that I just wanted a brief answer from, maybe either from one of you or just one or two of you, on this question of how we see parents' rights and children's rights. Again, not being balanced, that's the wrong phrase, but how should we think about these things? So for example, we often make the assumption that parents are there to protect children and to educate children, but it is also the case that some parents are the source of children's exploitation and abuse, or are ignorant, for example, of the conditions required to keep children safe and participating online. Other parents, may very well want to be overly surveying of children's activity, particularly at the moment where actually they are starting to seek out more privacy and so on. So yeah, I'd be interested to know from any of the three of you about how you would suggest that we think about parents' rights and children's rights in the same frame here. Sonia.
Well, I'll start off and observe that there is no UN Convention on the Rights of the Parent. So parents' rights are a matter of, they're in some national law and certainly in case law, but they don't, what is striking about child rights is the emphasis on children's rights and parental responsibilities. And the gist of the convention, as I understand it, that there are many child rights experts here, is that the convention tries very hard to, and indeed the general comment, to identify the ways in which states and all other actors, civil society, businesses, educators and so on, should support parents primarily in their role of bringing up their children, and it's a supporting role and a kind of a framework in kind of minimal terms, but that the state and others must also be ready to step in when there is a threat to the rights of the child, and that's the difficult balance. And where it shows up in relation in the convention, in Article 5, it is a balance against the child's evolving capacity. And so it's to recognise that even when you do have a kind of settlement of understanding of what is parental responsibility, what's the state's responsibility and so on, there is always that question of what it is that the child themselves can do for themselves as an independent rights holder. And that is progressive, but even from the start, children have their certain capacities.
Thank you for that. Anil or Amanda, either you want to comment on that at all? I think Anil, you're muted.
Okay, sorry, I was lost. So what was the question?
Just this point about thinking about parents and children, and as Sonia said so vividly, of course, we don't have a charter of parents' rights. But we do have to make certain assumptions about parents upholding children's rights, not just states.
That's quite important, because rights cannot be fulfilled without someone helping to realize those rights, and parents are there. Not only the parents, other duty bearers, the schools, the government are also there. But parents are, as I mentioned, the first layer of protection. So the parents are not first of all not aware of the risks and the duties they need to fulfill, and in many cases, like the parents, they blame children for getting addicted to screens, or also using inappropriate apps on sites, but they don't realize that children learn from the parents, and the parents fail to fulfill their duties. So it's very important to work with the parents and also to make them responsible. And I would like to share one thing, in mostly in the villages and also even in the cities in Nepal, small children, they are not allowed to use smartphones until the online classes, and they used to borrow their parents or their elder siblings' phones to look at different sites, and also they may also look at the things which their parents or their elder siblings store on their phones, like those adult sites and those adult contents. Many children, they first look at those things on their parents' mobile phones. That's also another thing. So it's very important, if the parents need their children to be safe and protected, they need to fulfill their duties, and we need to work with the parents very closely. So that's why, as a practitioner, we are organizing parental workshops to look at what children are doing, and also even the language they don't know. Like there's some jokes, like some parents, they thought LOL is lots of love, and somebody died, and one old lady made a comment, LOL, lots of love. So we're teaching them about the slangs children are using, the sites they are visiting, and also the apps they are using, the potential harms. So many parents don't know. So it's important to work with the parents, and maybe we can develop something like a charter for the parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. And actually that, I'm going to go to the questions now in the Q&A tab. So if other people have questions, pop them in there. First of all, I would flag that David Suter was adding some helpful comments there, I think, in the chat panel about references to parents' rights and giving us some info there, and Sonia responding. So that's an interesting correspondence. But let's go to the question here that, and apologies if I mispronounce your name, Gojde is putting in the Q&A here, picking up on this point that Anil was just making about the need to educate parents and to reach parents and raise their awareness of these issues. And this person is asking, I think specifically to Sonia, maybe to all of you, in fact, do you think that studies on children's rights in the digital world are adequately reaching parents and raising awareness? Or when you compare the process before digital rights were accepted, do you think that awareness levels are improving and being increased? So, you know, are we doing any better through having a digital rights framework, for example? Is it going to make a difference in encouraging parents to sort of think more carefully about what their children's needs and rights are?
Shall I? Well, I think my estimate, this is going to be very different in different parts of the world, so I won't generalise wildly, but I think the kinds of headlines that I showed that highlight the risks are definitely raising the awareness of many parents, though not all, and their sense of their responsibility. But I think parents, and I draw now on my research with British parents particularly, feel outsmarted by the pace and complexity of technological innovation. And so we're asking them to be aware of risks they can't understand, and that none of us, many experts, don't understand. What are the risks of the kind of the algorithmic management of the information environment? You know, what the parent sees online is not what the child sees online. They're in sort of different managed spaces now in ways that are not transparent. So I think it is fantastically hard, and that's why some balance of regulation as well as awareness raising, in my mind, is really crucial.
Thank you. And Amanda, I think you were going to step in there as well. Go on.
Sorry, Vicky. Yeah, I was just going to say that I think you know, the tone of the debate in the mainstream media unfortunately has the effect of frightening parents about their responsibilities rather than empowering them with the right levels of knowledge to sort of support their children appropriately in online spaces. And I think this is a real travesty. I think it's something that as an international community we need to really think carefully about. So to my mind, there's a very big piece to do around correcting, you know, a corrective for the media discourses around children and technology. Of course, it's really important that we communicate to parents that there are risks. Children do suffer as a consequence of things that happen to them online, but we need to be empowering parents with the right sorts of tools and resources and support mechanisms to enable them to do the right thing by their children. And I think to some of the contexts in which we've worked, for example, recently, it's really clear that children are coming online ahead of their parents. They're coming online primarily via mobile phones. They're learning and exploring, and often well before their parents have. Actually, in some of those settings, we need to wrap a lot more support around the parents' experience of their child going online. And I think the other thing that I would just highlight in part in response to the previous question, but also here, is that many children note that their parents are under-equipped to support them in all kinds of ways, whether it's to protect them or to enable them to maximise the opportunities. And I think one of the things that they frequently raised in the consultations for the general comment was, in fact, that parents, even where parents were aware of the things that children do online and were taking steps to support them in proactive ways, often parents' practices and attitudes did not evolve with the child as they grew and to remind parents, I guess, that that children's requirements change over time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Let's maybe move on to a question now from Bhaskar Chowdhury about digital violence. So I presume referring to the availability of violent content online, whether that be in gaming or discussions or videos. So suggesting this might be affecting the mind of children, children's minds, and asking whether or not we ought to educate children at an earlier stage about the risks associated with this. Who would like to take that one? Anil?
Yes, yeah, as I mentioned that when we have new technology, we need to learn and we need to teach children to use the technology. And this is not happening in many schools. It may happen in some countries, but in my country, the only education children get in schools about computer is about the computer hardware, computer software, this is CPU, monitor, that type of education is there, but there is no education about the online safety. So it has to be started in early age, and also to look at not only the negative side, dark side, but also to look at the positive and constructive use. Not to tell them what not to do, but to teach them how to do and what will be the consequences. So those things are not happening. And violence, not only the online violence, but also the sensitivity towards the violence, and also to avoid violence, and also to speak out and be sensitive to others and sensitive to your own feelings should also be taught. So it's very important. The online safety should be included in the curricula from the early age.
No, definitely not disagree with that. Either of you want to add something, Amanda?
I was just going to say that I think when it comes to gaming, we need to be very, very careful about some of the assumptions we make about the causal relationships between children's gaming practices and the impacts on their mental health and well-being. I think the literature is very complex. It very much depends on circumstances, family support, a whole range of factors. And I think what's often lost in the debate around gaming and children's rights is that for children, online play is crucial, and it's never been more crucial than in the last 24 months since the pandemic reduced children's opportunities for other forms of leisure and relaxation. And so I think we just need to proceed with addiction. And clearly post-pandemic for some forms of recalibration and putting digital back in its right place. But I think there's also a lot of wonderful benefits to gaming that we need to hold in, or balance, I guess, as we proceed to think about violence and gaming and so on. It's a very complicated picture, and I know many people would like very simple solutions.
Yes, particularly in policy circles, I think, on that one. As you say, it is very much more complicated than that. Let's maybe move on to some other questions. There's some really great questions coming up here. I'm going to leap to one that's just come in at the very end from Rafi Maristella about privacy. How do you ensure that in your pursuit to monitor or moderate children's rights in a digital world, that you don't infringe on a child's rights to privacy and autonomy, perhaps even getting into the difficult territory, I suppose, of child surveillance? I think it's a really great question. Yeah, what do we do about this? Sonia, I'm going to pick you first because you've done so much good work on this precise topic. It's really difficult.
It is a great question, and we don't know the answer because it's not possible to be unobserved online in the way that it's possible to be unobserved offline. And I think we've never properly recognized how so much of childhood and growing up as a child is about being unobserved, not being private or secret, but not always being watched and scrutinized. And there kind of isn't this way. So, you know, even if the parent is not watching everything the child does online, and they're being advised to do that, which is problematic, but the technology, the datafication of everything we do online means that there is no such privacy. So being unobserved is kind of disappearing online, and we just don't know what the long-term effects are, but I think we intuitively feel, and we can kind of claim theoretically that that's the space where we exercise freedom of thought and agency and self-determination. It's when we're precisely not being scrutinized or nudged or pressured or judged. So I think it is fantastically difficult. But I guess this is why I kind of come back to some of the conceptual tools of the convention on the rights of the child. I mean, firstly, that you have to take a holistic perspective, and secondly, that you have to kind of make a best interests judgment. And the best interest judgment is always going to be provisional and contextual and requires kind of weighing things up. But the ambition is to find a mechanism by which all the rights are promoted and none are moderated or infringed. And if I can just take another 30 seconds, I was glad that Anil brought up the needing to learn to drive and needing to learn to kind of cross a road sort of analogy, because I spend a certain amount of time thinking rather about the wider design of the built environment within which people do learn to drive or cross roads, and how it is that we're not all observed, or at least we haven't been historically, in our towns and urban spaces, but we do design our world in ways that children kind of feel at ease in some parts and can mix with adults safely in other parts, and are kept away and protected from yet other parts in ways that adults don't feel their rights are being infringed, and historically at least parents have not felt their children were terrifically at risk. So I do think there's something about the kind of the crudity of the design options available to us in relation to the digital world, and that's where we need kind of more subtlety that enable different kinds of possibilities rather than observed, not observed, private, scrutinized. You know, it's too binary at the moment.
Yeah, going back to the point you make at the beginning about whether we are perhaps on the cusp here of quite a step change in the nature of the internet as a whole, it being, as you say, this, you know, it's an all or nothing, same for everyone, broadly, you know, the same for everyone, not considering the needs specifically of children. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch this space over the next 5 years. Excellent. Anil, I'm going to take a question for you now. From Kimberly Wilson: is enforcing children's rights for the digital world down to parents alone, or can and do other bodies such as governments play a role in enforcing these rights as well? And if so, how? You had that lovely diagram at the end of your presentation where you sort of talked about the different layers, like onion skins, around a child. So could you say a bit more about, you know, what types of protection are required at different levels, and you know, who should bear ultimate responsibility?
Thank you so much. Parents are, as I mentioned, in the first layer for protection of a child, and they can do a lot, and they need to do a lot. And also I need to add one thing regarding the previous question about the monitoring and moderating children's contents. If that is done with the consent of the child or is appropriate, and also it's a very tricky question, and also like many companies, they use apps for parental control. Actually, I think that word is not correct to say it's a parental control. It should be something like parental guidance, parental education, parental support type of app, not controlling children, and also not to surveillance, not to see, not to police the child, but to teach the child what is good and what is safe, and the child should decide what he or she will do. So that's how parents can play a very good role, good support with the child's protection. But at the same time, as I mentioned, that the support system at the social service organizations, the helpline system, the reporting mechanism, the legal measures, and also the system made by the tech companies like to enforce age verification strictly. Those things are not there. So it's not only the parents, they need to be working together with others and also getting support, and this is not happening. So organizations like ours and the institutions like ours need to advocate and to make those people do their job properly. And the other thing, like when we see like in most of the content in the internet is not child friendly. Those contents are not made for children. Number one, because children are not the people who buy the products or services. Most of the products and services are directed towards the adults, and they make those products for adults, not for children. So there are not many contents, not many things which are suitable for children. So those things are lacking, and children are forced to use those things. And things, even things like the gaming and other things which are made with age ratings are also not strictly followed. But still, I would say for the local languages, like in my country, there are not many contents suitable for children, and they use adults' content. And those things, the content makers also need to make good contents for children, and parents and other people not only restrict and stop children to say, don't do this, don't do that. They need to guide what to do and what is suitable, what is good for children. So in that way, I would say that parents play a good role. They need to play a good role, but other people also are very much responsible. They need to fulfill their responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is very much an ecosystem of players who bear these different responsibilities in different ways towards children. I really like that point you're making at the beginning about parental surveillance tools perhaps being seen more as a guide than as a form of control. And I'm reminded of the inclusion in the 5 Rights agenda of the suggestion that children should be informed about the use of these types of technologies by parents, so that children are sort of aware that these are in place. So yes, we must remember this. I think we've probably got time for maybe one more question. I want to pick something that's very forward-looking. So it's a great question here from Hannah Horn-Robinson. Could someone talk about rights around shared virtual reality platforms? I mean, it's a really topical question. I think just this week we had that announcement, didn't we, from Meta, that they were going to introduce the notion of sort of personal space, uninvadable personal space around avatars to prevent harassment. Again, is there, so I suppose I'm going to expand this question. First of all, can anybody say anything useful about what children's rights in virtual reality might mean or look like? And then the second is perhaps a broader question. Are we in danger, do you think, in any way of designing, whether it's conventions of rights or whether it's digital policy interventions, for the technologies that we already have rather than the technologies that are coming?
Okay, I will kick off. There was a lot of talk during the process of consultation and drafting of the general comment about being future-proofed, though there was some sense that perhaps 5 years is more feasible than 20 years. Who knows what is coming. I don't have a problem with everything that's been said so far about children's rights applying in relation to virtual reality platforms. And that's partly because they are platforms and they are owned, and they're owned by businesses who sit in particular jurisdictions within which there is a legal framework. So the challenge, as always, is to know what's happening, to have the evidence, to have the kind of the if you like, the kind of the transparency or the accountability of how the platform works. Perhaps something we haven't talked about very much yet, but is really important, I think, in the UN Convention, perhaps in all rights frameworks, is the importance of remedy. And I think remedy is not only, we can see remedy as a sort of, after the damage is done, does the child have a kind of child-friendly route to put things right? And of course, things can't always be put right. So remedy can sound a bit like it's, too little, too late, as it were. But I think from the point of view of the business model, if remedy is highlighted and remedy is enforced by governments, that becomes a real imperative to those building these virtual reality platforms to be sure that they have anticipated what might come, because it's going to be in their business interest and in their due diligence and compliance. And the classic mechanism for doing that is child rights impact assessment in this particular domain. And we don't talk enough about kind of anticipating, but we can anticipate child rights impacts in any kind of new environment, and then of course we have to come along and consult children and get the evidence and talk to stakeholders and discover what happened and then adjust. It may be that we're always a little behind the game, but I think there are kind of practical tools around that help to anticipate as much as possible. And I don't know if anyone's telling Meta about those, but honestly, we shouldn't have to tell them. They should know.
Well, no, and actually on that point, Sonia, it seems crazy to me that we know for a fact that the internet is not designed for children. It does not center children's rights, needs, and patients. And I think there's the real onus on platforms and others who are designing services, not just for deploying design principles that really foreground and that really try to insist that design processes respond to those adequately. I think until we start to think of children as key from the outset, we won't have the solutions that we're looking for. Of course, having said that, we haven't lost everything, and there are mechanisms, as Sonia's just gestured, for us to kind of reel things in. But I think if we could begin to centre safety by design more prominently in the life of technology providers, that would be a really fantastic first step.
Thank you, that's great. Anil, any last words from you before I hand over to Leon?
Thank you so much. I would like to respond to one question about taking phones to schools. Many countries practice this and they don't allow phones in school. And it's been quite a big debate, and we discuss with some children in schools, and we try to get their views. So they don't agree that phones should not be banned in schools, but they agree that there should be some regulation where to use the phone, what sites they can use. Those things, if are in place, they feel that it's okay to take phones to schools. It's not only like they are using phones instead of playing games and all these things. So there should be some way of regulating that. But banning phone is might not be the correct answer. So I think we also need to look at the children's perspective, and also most importantly, as we already discussed, about the best interest of the child. Thank you.
Thank you for that. What a great comment to finish on. A reminder that, as always with technology, we're looking to promote positive use that benefits children rather than just forbid it all. Three great speakers, fantastic questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to them all. I've really enjoyed doing this. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Leon for last words.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to the panel. That was just tremendously rich and informative and challenging of such a complex topic, and you've guided us through it so well. And I just wanted to say, for people watching, we'll be back next week at 5 o'clock on Monday the 14th, where the topic will be Child on the Edge, Plight of Children in Fragile and Conflict States. And this is about how the UNCRC operates and how issues of child rights are delivered in context of conflict and wider challenges of fragility of states. I'm very much look forward to that. We have another excellent panel. But I just really want to thank Minoli, Nika and Wiam for organizing all of this, Lani for setting up the meeting today, which was excellent. I particularly want to thank our speakers and chair, and particularly Vicky, who's doing all of this while experimenting with COVID. A tremendous resilience, and thank you so much. And Neil and Amanda going beyond the call of duty for joining us at the time that we set. And Sonia, wonderful to see you. So thank you so much. And lastly, thanks everyone for attending. This it was a very rich set of questions as well, and great to see the response. So thank you all. We'll post the film of all of this, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in a week's time. Thank you, everybody.